Welcome to a spoiler-free review of the Avengers Age of Ultron, directed by Joss Whedon, an action film that continues to follow the Avengers just before discovering an artificial intelligence that is later used with good intentions by Tony Stark to create a worldwide defense program called Ultron. However, in order to protect and cleanse planet Earth, Ultron campaigns to send humanity into extinction. Right at the very beginning of this review, I'm just going to come out and say it, I am not the world's biggest Avengers fan. However, I will admit at the time I did go into it a little cynical because of all the praise that it was receiving. People were saying that it was better than The Dark Knight, it was better than this, blah blah blah. First of all, people need to really stop doing that, because when you do that, you're only doing harm to the film. You're going to have pretty much no choice but to go into the film cynical, because you're going to have that whole mindset thinking like, oh, you're saying that this film is better than that film. Well, we'll see. And you're going to come out disappointed. Looking back on it now, and after rewatching some of it kind of recently, I think it's a good film. Not a great film, not a film that I would deem to be the epitome of what a summer blockbuster should be, but still a good film. Now, I will be bringing up the first Avengers just a couple more times throughout this review, just to kind of compare the first Avengers to Age of Ultron. But as for Age of Ultron, I think it is an improvement from the first one, which I know is not the most popular opinion among many people, which I will get into a little later because I think there's a reason why. But yeah, I do think this film is an improvement. For starters, even though the climax is a little too reminiscent of the first Avengers, and it's a little bit of a letdown in terms of what the Avengers are fighting because it's just a bunch of drones that all look the same, with the exclusion of the climax, I found myself being a lot more entertained by the spectacle this time around, especially in the opening sequence. Not only is it better than the opening sequence from the first Avengers, but I just think it's just incredibly entertaining. It looks great. It definitely sounds great. However, if there is a problem that I have with, less specifically with the opening of the film, but more specifically with the first half of the film, and this is kind of a problem that I have with the first Avengers, is that it tries way too hard to be funny. Some of it works, and when it does, it can be pretty hilarious. In fact, there's actually a moment in the film where I was laughing out loud, but when it's not funny, and it doesn't work. And not only are some of these jokes not very funny, but some of them just pop up in weird random places, like in some more dramatic scenes where you'll have something happening, where you're supposed to feel something, and then a character will just pop one out and it's like, well, that's kind of gone. However, one thing that this film has in comparison to the first film, something that I think the first film actually lacked, is depth with its characters. Instead of this film sitting and pointing and saying, hey look, it's Captain America, hey look, it's Iron Man, it actually kind of felt as if this film actually tried to give these characters a little bit more depth than what we have seen in the previous film. Now, of course, you can always go back and watch the origin stories and the sequels, but I want to watch something that furthers these characters, and I commend this film for at least attempting to do that. This film, in terms of the characterization, it's kind of generic. It's kind of what you would expect from a film of this stature, and what I mean is, it's what you would expect from a summer blockbuster. Just because a movie is filled with spectacle and is a summer blockbuster doesn't mean that the film needs to be a paint-by-numbers sort of film in terms of characterization. That's all I'm saying. In my opinion, it should be the characters driving the spectacle and not the other way around. And when it's the latter, I find it difficult to actually care for what's actually happening on screen. And if I don't care for what's happening on screen, then I don't really care about the film. Now, I'm not entirely saying that that's the case here, just in certain aspects. But if I were somebody who have just seen the first one and is just going into this film, then that might be more the case. Now, there are some new characters here. A lot of people have been talking about the twins, played by Aaron Taylor-Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen. Aaron Taylor-Johnson, he plays Quicksilver in the film, although I'm not entirely sure if they ever actually call him Quicksilver. I wouldn't be surprised because Disney doesn't own Quicksilver, it's Fox, but whatever. Scarlet Witch is played by Elizabeth Olsen, and they're okay. There is some depth that's given to them, but like I kind of already implied, it's sort of paint by numbers. In short, they're really just there to serve the story more than anything else. As for Ultron, I like his motives a lot more than I ever did Loki's, because Loki's was the typical, I want to take over the world, I want to rule the world, that kind of stuff. But Ultron's motives, albeit that we've seen motives like this before, it's nothing entirely new. I think it makes more sense because Ultron comes from this perspective that in order to save the world, he basically has to eradicate the entire human species, which makes sense because, well, humans have done more bad than they've ever done good to this planet, so there's that. The problem with his character, though, is that he's not all that memorable. His personality doesn't really stand out. He doesn't really look all that cool. He's just kind of there to basically be something for the Avengers to fight, and that's really kind of it, unfortunately. And even though I like Ultron's motives more than Loki's, I actually prefer Loki over Ultron because at least Loki had a personality, and that's kind of saying a lot because I was not the world's biggest fan of Loki. I thought he was kind of an okay villain, but in comparison to Ultron, I think he's pretty damn good. But I will give it to the film for at least trying to give Ultron a personality by making him funny. However, it doesn't really work because there are times where he's trying to be threatening, yet he might do something clumsy, but most of the time in the film, he's just kind of sarcastic, which was just kind of odd in my personal opinion. Since I am still on the subject of characters, I want to reveal my favorite scene in the entire film, and it's a very simple one, and it's not a spoiler. It's just a scene that features all the Avengers at this party, and the reason why it's my favorite scene in the entire film is because it really felt as if I was watching not superheroes, but these people just kind of interacting with one another, enjoying each other's company, telling each other jokes, that kind of stuff. And it felt authentic. It felt honest. And it's a scene that actually feels as if it belongs in a different film. And I mean that in a very, very positive way. I really, really love this scene. As far as saying anything else before I say what I need to say before I end this review, I have 3 things that I need to say. First of all, there's a character that shows up later on in the film that I really liked. I thought the character was pretty awesome. Second, the story takes a turn and goes to a place that might give some people some deja vu because it's basically a copy of what happens in one of the films that takes place in the same universe, and I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. And finally, there is a trope that I thought this film was going to give into. Thankfully, it doesn't do that. And for that, I give it points for not doing that. In fact, the setup is so obvious, I would not be surprised if someone came out and said that it's some kind of joke, but I don't know. As you can see, I changed my shirt, and yes, okay, one thing I needed to say, I actually mentioned this at the beginning of the video, as to why I believe some people are coming at this film a little underwhelmed and a little disappointed. What I believe is happening to some people is that the novelty is now wearing off, and they're starting to see the formulas, the beats that these films tend to take on. Movies following similar structures, that's nothing new, and I don't think that's quite the big problem. The big problem is oversaturation. For a lot of people, including myself, we're getting a little tired of these films because 1, they do follow a similar structure, and 2, there are so many of them. So we're at a point, I think, where they're starting to kind of blend together. And unfortunately, and this is indeed my opinion, albeit one could definitely argue that these films offer more meat than the average dumbed-down summer blockbuster, when I walk away from these films, I always feel unsatisfied. The way I see it, all of these companies are so focused on creating universes to the point where the individual pieces kind of come out a little half-baked. Perhaps I'm looking far too into it, but instead of exploring the psyche of these characters, these films are more focused on the spectacle, the cheap gimmicks. These films are always heavily produced, there's a lot of CGI, the third act always has to end in some kind of big climactic battle that has a city in ruins. However, there are some exceptions, like I do love Guardians of the Galaxy, I really loved X-Men Days of Future Past, but outside of those 2 films, I really can't say that I've seen a comic book related film that I would deem to be great in a really, really long time. Again, going back to this whole thing, but I really do feel like a lot of these films lack intimacy, and I know that's not something that I'm going to be getting with these films, and I've kind of come to terms with that. I know a lot of people out there enjoy these films, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not trying to change anybody's opinions on these films, but as for me, I don't think these are bad films. In fact, I think these are good films. But like I said earlier in this review, I just think they could be better. Overall, despite Age of Ultron's problems, I do believe it to be a better film than its predecessor. So I'm going to give the Avengers Age of Ultron a borderline 3.5 out of 5. And do let me know if you plan on seeing this film. You probably do. And if you have seen it, do let me know your opinions on the film. And as always, I'm Colyn Kirkland, and thank you so much for watching.